We are celebrating today 200 years of the very famous expedition of Martius to Brazil between 1817 and 1820. It is very difficult for such a botanist to tell a whole story. We are going to try to structure that, talking about his early life and then probably his journey to Brazil and the publications of some benchmark treatments, like, for example, the Flora Brasiliensis or the Historia Naturalis Palmarum. I would say that the life of Martius starts as a botanist in the university. He was only 15, 17 when he started studies in medicine at the University of Erlangen. And there he was extremely influenced by, for example, his professor, von Treber, himself a disciple of Linnaeus. And then there was a close kind of relationship with the brothers Ness of Efsenbeck, who were also celebrated botanists. The skills of Martius as botanist were very soon identified by members of the Academy of Science in Munich, and he was just after he finished his studies appointed as assistant of the director of the Botanical Garden of the Academy. From then, it is clear that some major events in his life will deeply influence the studies on neotropical botany. But Martius not only collected palms in his travel. What we are displaying here is a group of duplicate specimens stored in the Herbarium of Geneva. About 1,200 of Martius' plants are present in our collection. In any case, we all know that the most important sets of collection gathered by Martius are present in the Herbarium of the Botanical Garden of Munich, with duplicates that belong to his private collection nowadays stored in the Herbarium of the Botanical Garden of Meissen in Brussels. These specimens show the beautiful diversity, taxonomic and morphologic diversity of the plants of Brazil. And of course, they show all the biomes that were visited by Martius, for example, the Caatinga, the Cerrado, the Mata Atlantica, or even the Amazon. Only the Pampas or the Pantanal were not visited by Martius and speaks in the frame of their travel. By the end of this visit to Brazil, Martius brought back to Europe about 20,000 specimens, representing about 6,500 species, a huge amount of information represented by specimens that was then put into the light of natural sciences in Europe. It is clear that one of the major contributions to botany of Martius was his study about the plants, and especially the publication of the Historia Naturalis Palmarum between 1823 and 1853. Historia Naturalis Palmarum is structured in 3 volumes. Volume 1, which concentrates information on the morphology, on the anatomy of palms, and also includes some information on botany. For the publication of Volume 1 of the Historia Naturalis Palmarum, Martius was assisted by celebrated botanists like, for example, Hugo von Moll, one of the most important anatomists at that time, and Franz Unger, who was also an expert on the fossils. Volume 2 is kind of important because it concentrates information on all the palms that he collected in Brazil during his travel between 1817 and 1820, whereas Volume 3 is kind of huge compilation about the knowledge of palms all over the world. These 3 volumes, as we can see here, also belong to the great collection of the Library of the Conservatory of Geneva. And we can see, or we will see a bit later, that Martius was able to publish all these novelties in other publications different than this one. The Historia Naturalis Palmarum was published between 1823 and 1853. 30 years of work in which 3 volumes were published. This is volume 1. In the first volume, it was described in detail the anatomy and the morphology of the palms. What is relatively unknown of this volume 1 is that also aspects on the development of flowers and inflorescences were included. What is extremely smart from his side was the identification of the arrangements of flowers and bracts to the definition of the different palm groups. And where did all this material come from? The material and the samples used for the anatomical and morphological studies. That was material that was sent from Mexico by Carwens or Schide, material collected in Brazil by Cello or Glaciu, even material collected by Schlegel in Suriname. From the Old World, Martius received material from India and Sri Lanka collected by Griffith and Wallich, and from Southeastern Asia material collected by, for example, Reinwart or Theismann. He got also material collected from Australia and sent by the celebrated botanist Cunningham. By the end of his life, we can identify about 21 new genera and 250 new species described by Martius, of course not only in the Historia Naturalis Palmarum, but also in other contributions like, for example, Palmetum orbignianum, the publication made by the French botanist Alcides Dessalines Orbigny. Martius also describes some new species and genera in publications like, for example, Genera Plantarum or Systema Vegetabilium from Romer and Schultes, or even some contributions in journals like, for example, Linnea. Just after the return of Martius in Europe, he decides to start several editorial projects. I should probably cite 3 of them. Reise in Brazilian, which was produced together with his partner Spitz. A second publication, Nova Genera and Species Plantarum, related to the Brazilian plants, and of course, the Historia Naturalis Palmarum. But probably the most monumental work produced by Martius and co-workers was the publication of the Flora Brasiliensis. Flora Brasiliensis, which nowadays we consider as a complete flora because it treats all the families that were known for Brazil at that time. And I call that a monumental work because it treated in total about 22,000 species, about 7,000 new to science, an amazing figure. And all this work was produced throughout the publication of 30 volumes. The families were treated by about 60 different authors, most of them coming from Germany. The publication of the flora started in 1840 and ended in 1906. Martius was the main editor of the flora. He started in 1840 and was the main editor of this magnificent publication until the year of his death in 1868. Nowadays, this complete flora is considered as one of the most important works for the knowledge of botany in the neotropics. Martius will pass away in Munich in 1868, and as a product of his life, we can take into account the 150 publications on plant taxonomy. Major contributions, of course, include the Historia Naturalis Palmarum and the Flora Brasiliensis, for which he was the editor until the last day of his life. 10,000 kilometers of journey in the frame of his visit to Brazil, a lot of specimens collected, and a lot, of course, of information on different other domains, like, for example, plant ecology or even anthropology. I'm sure that next year in Rio, in the frame of the International Palm Conference, we are going to discuss a lot about his life and his major contributions to our knowledge of plant biology.